Mel, why did you become a comedian?
Sex.
I see.
The one and only Mel Brooks.
I can't imagine making movies without having watched his movies.
Blazing Saddles.
Young Frankenstein.
Spaceballs.
Hey, I'm the writer, the director, the producer, and the star. As the actor, I ask for a little more money. As the director, I say, what are you, crazy? You stink. I'm not going to pay that kind of money.
To a lot of people who went into comedy, they thought, that seems like the best job in the world, the Mel Brooks job.
I'm glad nobody took it.
He was writing partners with Richard Pryor. How did that come about?
Well, Mel and Pryor knew each other in the Village in New York.
Okay.
And so they were friendly from there. And I, according to Mel, when he first read Andrew Bergman's script at the time it was called Tex X, was the first draft of Blazing Saddles, and Andrew had written it as a spec. He was a graduate student when he decided to take it on and began a rewriting process. He kept Andrew on, which was unusual. And then he called Richard Pryor.
Yeah. How was that kind of Lennon-McCartney sort of collaboration? And, because I think in the movie, Richard Pryor said they were was it 7 weeks or longer in the writer's room together collaborating?
It was somewhere in there. Yeah. About 7 weeks or so. And apparently, from the stories, it was even funnier than the movie, that group of people in that room. What I understand is that actually Pryor had a lot to do with the character of Mongo that Alex Karras plays. The
guy who punches the horse.
Yes, and he wrote. Apparently, Richard Pryor wrote a lot of the Mongo stuff. Mongo only pawn in Game of Life, and so apparently that was Pryor. But specifically, what can be attributed to whom, I really just don't know.
Yes, that is Michael Bonfiglio, and you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101. Where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon, hello. And Michael, along with Judd Apatow, is the director of the new HBO documentary, Mel Brooks, the 99-Year-Old Man, which, I'm reading this, follows the life, career, friendships, and loves of the legendary writer, director, producer, and performer, Mel Brooks, chronicling his early experiences and rise to stardom. And the documentary features not only Mel Brooks, who is 99 years old, but also appearances from Conan O'Brien, Dave Chappelle, Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, Patton Oswalt, Dana Gould, Sarah Silverman. The list goes on and on and on. And of course, Mel is one of the Mount Rushmore pillars of American comedy. And I'm going to dive in with Michael on not only the history of Mel Brooks, but the comedy he influenced, the making of the documentary, and what it's like to collaborate with Judd Apatow on several projects. Michael and Judd also co-directed the wonderful George Carlin documentary, George Carlin's American Dream. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On Thursday, February 19th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's in Park Slope, I'll be presenting my show, That 80s Improv Challenge. 3 improv teams compete by creating scenes based on obscure videos from the 1980s. And mark your calendar for Thursday, February 26th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater. I'll be presenting my show, AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human rapper take on a machine learning AI in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or follow me on social media at Harmon Leon. Also, take some time to like, subscribe, comment, and review Comedy History 101. Give us no less than 5 stars on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, or on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram, comedyhist101. Every little bit helps, and we love bringing you such great episodes like the one we have here today on Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. Oh, also Jerry Seinfeld's featured in the documentary. And now, without further ado...
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone! Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, good, Harmon. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice meeting you. Are you here in New York as well, or?
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn.
Oh, same here. There we go.
Oh, whereabouts?
Yeah, I'm in Williamsburg.
Okay, I'm in Crown Heights.
Oh, very cool, very cool. And Mel Brooks, as we learned in your documentary, Lower East Side. Was he from Williamsburg?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought so in the documentary you said 3rd Street. So that's 3rd Street here in Williamsburg.
In Brooklyn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, the building that he lived in when he was little is gone. But we found a picture through the city archives of the building. But yeah, he's a Brooklyn boy.
All right. Well, I'm going to take a sojourn to where he might have grown up.
Yeah. There's 2 addresses. I think it's 365 South 3rd Street, I want to say, is the one that building's not there anymore. And then, I forget. There's an image in the movie of like his yearbook picture that has the other address. Yeah,
okay. So that's just like right off of Bedford Avenue, South 3rd. So I know exactly where that is. But
yeah.
But not only congratulations on the documentary, thank you for making this documentary. I loved it.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, so as a kid growing up, what was your first recollection with Mel Brooks, seeing a Mel Brooks movie or him on TV? And what was your reaction there?
I think my very first encounter with Mel Brooks would have probably been, do you remember that Free to Be You and Me record? The Marlo Thomas, it was like a kid's record in the early 70s. And yeah, anyway, it was a TV special. And for some reason we had the record in my house, and there's a sketch on it where Mel and I can't remember who the other person is, but you could look it up. They do a sketch where they're like infants, like babies, and it's like their thoughts.
Hi,
I'm
a baby.
What do you think I am, a loaf of bread?
You could be. What do I know? I'm just born. I'm a baby. I don't even know if I'm under a tree or in a hospital or what. I'm just so glad to be here.
Almost like a way precursor to that movie with Bruce Willis as the talking. Look Who's Talking.
Yeah, Look Who's Talking. 1 and 2.
Yeah, and then there was one with Pets or something, like Look Who's Talking Now, I think. But anyway, so I remember that record as a kid, but I didn't really have any association with Mel Brooks. But really the first movie of his that I remember seeing was, my brother had a sleepover birthday party one time when we were kids, and we rented Young Frankenstein.
What knockers?
Oh, thank you, Doctor.
And that was the first Mel Brooks movie I ever saw, and I just loved it, and it was so cool. It was like an old movie, but it was, I mean, it was weird that it was like, it was an older movie at the time. This would have been in the 80s that I saw it, but it was also like in black and white and looked like an older movie, and it was just hilarious, and I loved it. So that was probably my first.
What about Mel's humor that really connected you?
I think for a kid, a lot of it is very, it's broad, it's cartoonish, and you get it, and then there's stuff that goes over your head and you figure out later. There was, a little bit racy, and a little naughty, which was fun as a kid. To me, there's just something about Mel that just sort of like is comedy. Like it just sort of is American comedy. And, you see the influences of, I've always loved like the Warner Brothers cartoons and Looney Tunes and stuff, and you so much of his stuff is influenced by that, and by the Three Stooges, and stuff that I liked as a kid too, and still enjoy. Is just sort of infused in what Mel does, and then he has perpetuated comedic rhythms and ideas that I think we see all over the place still.
Yeah, and what are the essential elements that you think made Mel, such as his background and learning things from your documentary? Was he not only in World War II, but his job was to detect landmines or something like that?
It's crazy. Yeah. He was in France, like right after the Germans had left, but there were instances where he was shot at. His job was to go into these villages and places and find and defuse landmines. And he would like go through through the ground with a bayonet and hit and check for them. And, he describes it as like you push, but tink, and it would be like, oh, there's something there. And then they would have to undo it. So it's crazy. I mean, that he was facing literal life and death every day, just at a moment's notice, could have blown up and died, and I think I can only imagine for a kid of 18 years old, that would have been pretty formative.
He says in the documentary, one of his main catalysts of comedy is fear.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's the great motivator of comedy and almost everything else and I think, you see it, and Rob Reiner talks about it in the film, that like that idea of fear in his improvisations with Carl Reiner, especially with the 2,000-Year-Old Man, of like, in improvisation, you don't know what's going to happen. And there's a terror of like, what am I going to say? Am I going to be funny? Or am I going to embarrass myself?
This gentleman here is one of the phenomena of the world. He looks no older than Mr. Sean, and yet he is 2,000 years old. Is that true, sir?
Yes. You want to see my driver's license?
I think that fear has been a motivator for Mel. Fear of failure, fear of not being funny, fear of not being liked, fear of, criticism, all of those things drove him like they drive so many of us.
And was it working in the Borscht Belt? Was that like his foray into comedies, like such as his graduate school or undergraduate school studies of being a busboy in the Catskills?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he grew up in an era. I mean, Mel was born in 1926, before television, and so he when he was a young teenager, like 14 years old, he went up to the Catskills and got a job as a busboy and sort of a tumbler. And he got really his first big break as an understudy in a play. And the story he tells is that he was 14, 15 years old, was performing this play. The actor had gotten sick. Something had happened. Mel claims that the guy fell in a hole and hurt himself. And so Mel got the job as a child, and he was playing an old man. And something happened in the play that went wrong. He dropped a glass of water, and he kind of panicked and turned to the audience, breaking the fourth wall, took off his, old man wig and said, I've never done this before. I'm only 14 years old, and got a big laugh. And
he's addicted from there. That adrenaline rush of the first laugh. But he never, again, surprising things for me. Never really thought of comedy as a thing. Thought he was going to end up in the garment district, like all the other kind of, people in his neighborhood. But yeah, like that change and then getting that first laugh. Yeah.
And I think it was like it wasn't that he wasn't interested in comedy and show business. He that's what he wanted from a very, very early age. He was a drummer initially and performed any place that would take him, busking on the street in the subway, playing at weddings and bar mitzvahs and parties and things like that. He always wanted to be an entertainer and be in show business, but the reality of his life as a, Depression era kid in Brooklyn, his family didn't have two nickels to rub together. He was, it just wasn't something that seemed realistic at all. How do you do that? How do you become, a comedian, a filmmaker, somebody in show business? It was an outrageous idea, but he was able to do it.
Yeah. Then it just makes me laugh that he humbly said, if I could do it, anyone could do it.
Yeah.
He's, one of the great pillars of the Mount Rushmore of comedy.
Absolutely.
And what about making the documentary? What really surprised you about Mel that you previously didn't know about him?
I think that one of the things we were talking about before in regards to fear, I was really surprised and kind of moved by his candor with us talking about his sort of sense of imposter syndrome, his feelings at different periods of, I'm a failure. I'm never going to make it. Can I do this? Is this going to work? They're going to find me out. I'm really no good. And because when you see Mel perform and in the movies and all the Melness of him, like one of the biggest things to me that is just his supreme confidence. And to realize that just like myself and most people I know, that's not entirely there. It's there. He is extremely confident, but that he also has or had, and maybe to this day, I'm really not sure. But this sense of, I'm really actually no good, and criticism hurt him a lot. And he was very open about that, the anxiety that he experienced and going into therapy over it and, being so nervous and worked up when he was going to work at your show of shows in his early days.
Yeah, how old was he? Like in the show of show era, where it was this murderer's row of writers and performers in that room.
He was 24 when he started. Mm-hmm. He had come back from the army. After the war ended, he spent some time. He stayed in the service doing entertainment for the troops. When your show of shows happened, that started. I believe 1950, maybe double check me, but I think it was 1950, might have been late 1949. That was really his first, it was the beginning of television.
Yeah, that great Sid Caesar telling him, there's this new thing called television. I'm looking for comedy writers, where just the whole entity of television was something new.
Amazing. And the very first, this isn't in the film, but the very first Sid Caesar show that Mel wrote for was called the Admiral something Review. I should look it up, the exact name. It's just escaping me at the moment. But made by the company Admiral that made appliances, and they made televisions. And at a certain point, after a few weeks of doing this show, the show was so successful that they shut it down because they had to make more televisions, because so many people were buying them that the Admiral company didn't have the resources to put into the show and into making TVs. So they canceled the show, which is crazy. But it really was the very, very beginning of television. And what these people were figuring out was, what is television comedy? How does this new medium, how does comedy work in this new medium? And they were incredibly inventive, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and he had such great collaborations. And another thing was just how edgy was it in 1967 when he made the producers to actually, it's just 2 decades from World War II detached to start satirizing Hitler. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like, even today, that's like a little uncomfortable if there was no producers and it suddenly popped up. But in 1967, you're only, 2 decades away.
And now it's springtime for Hitler and Germany.
Yeah, and the thing was, people had been satirizing Hitler during World War II and during the lead, Charlie Chaplin, the Three Stooges, Warner Brothers cartoons, Walt Disney cartoons, so that wasn't unheard of. But then after the horrors of the Holocaust were revealed to the world, people weren't making it was considered way outside the bounds of taste to be talking about this stuff in a comedic way. And I'm not a comedy historian. I'm sure other people were doing it, but to do it in a movie and to do it so boldly and brashly with a song and it really was groundbreaking and new and really ballsy.
Again, he was writing partners with Richard Pryor. How did that come about? Because, again, their comedy just seems so opposite. And Richard, that's early 70s after, when he came back from, hanging out with the Black Panthers in Berkeley and, was the new reinvented Richard Pryor.
Yeah. Well, Mel and Pryor knew each other in the Village in New York.
Okay.
And so they were friendly from there. And according to Mel, when he first read Andrew Bergman's script at the time it was called Tex X, was the first draft of Blazing Saddles, and Andrew had written it as a spec. He was a graduate student, and Andrew Bergman, who then went on to write The In-Laws and The Freshman, and I mean, brilliantly funny, great filmmaker and writer. Mel read that script and decided to, when he decided to take it on and began a rewriting process, he kept Andrew on, which was unusual. Andrew was not anybody he had no presence in the industry. He was, again, a graduate student having written a spec. And Mel said, no, let's keep him on. He's funny and smart. I like his script. Instead of getting rid of him, which most people would have done, Mel kept him on. And then he called Richard Pryor. And I'm assuming because Richard Pryor is one of the funniest people ever. Mel knew him. And because he was black, I think Mel probably recognized at the time that we need a black voice in this room if we're going to be talking about race and racial prejudice and racial relations. It can't just be a bunch of white guys.
Yeah. How was that kind of Lennon-McCartney sort of collaboration? And, because I think in the movie, Richard Pryor said they were was it 7 weeks or longer in the writer's room together, collaborating?
It was somewhere in there. Yeah. About 7 weeks or so. And apparently, from the stories, it was even funnier than the movie, that group of people in that room. But I don't know. I mean, what I understand is that actually Pryor had a lot to do with the character of Mongo that Alex Karras plays.
The guy who punches the horse.
Yes.
Hey, you can't park that animal over there. It's illegal.
And he wrote, apparently Richard Pryor wrote a lot of the Mongo stuff, Mongo only pawn in Game of Life. And, so apparently that was Pryor, but specifically what can be attributed to whom, I really just don't know.
Yeah. And then also surprising of all the number of serious films he produced, such as Elephant Man and Francis and The Fly. What do you think is the connecting tissues that really attracted Mel to those projects that also connects to his previous comedy projects?
It's interesting. I've thought about what if, Mel's first two films, The Producers and The 12 Chairs, are not parodies. They're comedies, but they're not parodies. And neither of those was particularly successful. Not at the box office. The Producers had some critical success, but also a lot of critics panned it. He won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, beating out 2001 and the Battle of Algiers, and but when it initially came out, The Producers flopped, and then Peter Sellers saw it at a private screening and took out and he just was so taken with it, thought it was brilliant, took out a full page ad in the trades saying this is the most amazing comedy ever. And we put the ad in the film so you can see the exact text of it. And so it had a little bit of a resurgence, but it was not considered a success. And then The 12 Chairs really flopped, both critically and commercially. And so his next movie, Blazing Saddles, they kind of just went for broke, and Mel figured, what have I got to lose? But the point I was trying to get to was in terms of the serious films. If you watch The Producers and The 12 Chairs, if Blazing Saddles had not been a hit and it was a parody, if you look at Mel's work, two films that are not parodies, and then he just does parodies for quite a while. It's Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, Silent Movie, not quite a parody, but very specifically, but a parody of the silent films, the silent genre. Spaceballs, it's mostly parody, and History of the World Part 1 is sort of sketch, But if The 12 Chairs had been a hit, I guess this is my point. If The 12 Chairs had been a hit, I wonder if we would have gotten all of the parodies, or if Mel would have taken a different direction. Because the 12 Chairs it's very funny, but it's tonally, it's not Blazing Saddles, you know. And Mel's a really complex guy and a really intelligent guy, and he's very, very well read. And I think that he, according to him, you know, he felt that there were things that he wanted to express as an artist that didn't necessarily loan themselves to comedy. And so when he started Brooks Films in the late 70s, it was initially, I think, to produce Anne Bancroft's film Fatso, which is a great sort of comedy drama with Dom DeLuise. And I can't remember which came out first. I think The Elephant Man may have come out first, but Mel produced The Elephant Man, which is the opposite of a comedy. In fact, I asked David Lynch when we interviewed him, he's like, it's really his only, and David didn't really have much of an answer for it. It was more of an observation anyway, but it's really the only David Lynch movie that has no comedy in it. There's no comedy. And if you look at the rest of his work, there's comedy in all of his movies, but none in The Elephant Man. But I think, you know, Mel is a complicated guy who has a lot to say, and he saw Brooks Films as an outlet for that. And the amazing thing about The Elephant Man, not only is it, you know, just an incredible film that got David Lynch really his start. I mean, you know, he'd made Eraserhead, but that was kind of a midnight movie, and it was a art school project, and took him 7 years to make and all of that. But, you know, The Elephant Man really made him into the David Lynch who we know and love. Mel took his name off that movie because he didn't want people to see his name and think comedy, thought it could detract from the movie. Then it goes on and, you know, it's nominated for 10 Oscars and stuff. And for a guy who on the surface has such a big ego and, you know, puts his own, you know, there's the line in Blazing Saddles, piss on you, I'm working for Mel Brooks, you know, to remove his name for the sake of the work is really incredible.
Yeah, it'd be a different, so I was thinking of that, it would be a different framing if his name was on it. But if it was a parody, that also would be really funny.
But I think he was absolutely right, though. I remember going to see The Straight Story, David Lynch's film, and at the Angelica when it came out, and that movie starts as Walt Disney Pictures presents a film by David Lynch, and the whole theater cracked up, you know. And I think that if it had been, you know, a Mel Brooks production, it would have set the wrong tone.
Yeah, and was making the documentary, was that the first time you met Mel, like on day one? Wow.
Yes.
Tell me about that. He seemed like, and also this goes back to your documentary, he seems like the anti Jerry Lewis off camera guy. I mean, you talk about Jerry Lewis off camera and Mel's encounter with him, but is it one of those things, like, also like when you meet your heroes, you shouldn't meet your heroes, but he seems like just genuine, you know, always Mel Brooks ish.
Yeah, I mean, the guy you see in the film is the guy I met, you know. I think that part of who he is being on and performing. I think that I don't think it's a mask or a phony put on thing. I think it really is who he is. And, you know, obviously he turns it up, turns it down, but that's who he is. And you know, his family members said, yeah, that's my dad, you know. That's so there's something very, very real and genuine about it. But yeah, the guy you see in the movie is the guy I met, you know.
Yeah, and what's that like, just to be amongst, you know, again, one of the pillars of American comedy, you know, being amongst that presence of, you know, this is Mel Brooks, and I'm, you know, sharing a sides with him, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great. He, you know, you definitely, I got the sense that this was special, you know, that these were really, really special days that we got to be with him and listen to his stories. And it was really wonderful. I just felt tremendously lucky every day.
And what's the most he made you laugh when the cameras weren't rolling?
Ooh, good question. Most of the time that we spent with him, the cameras were rolling, because the time was precious and we didn't want to mess around. So I will say the most he made me laugh was on camera, and it's the scene that opens up part 2 of the documentary when Judd asked him, what's a typical day for you? How do you start your day? And Mel just riffed this really hilarious bit about waking up in the morning and asking himself questions to make sure that he still had all his marbles. But it's really funny. And we were all just like stifling laughter to not mess up the sound, because it was, he has a tendency to kind of tell some of the same stories. And so some of the things that he said, we'd heard before, but this was just like some brand new bit that he was riffing, and it was hilarious.
Yeah, and he has a tendency to tell the same stories, which is great in the film, where you have him telling the same story in different talk shows and bringing it all back. What was that kind of archival sort of nuts and bolts behind, finding all that footage and piecing it together, and how long was that process?
Oh, it went on for quite a while, like months and months and months. I wasn't personally doing the research. We had a fantastic team of folks doing that, but it was just so great to have, this almost like your own personal YouTube of like every Mel Brooks appearance and talk show. And, to me, he's almost funnier in those moments than sometimes the movies. And so we always wanted that part of like the kind of Mel the performer on the talk shows and things to be a big part of it. And then our incredible editor, Joe Beshenkovsky, put together these great sequences of Mel kind of telling the same stories over the years, and seeing them evolve, and Joe's just so talented and wonderful with the rhythms and everything and the musicality of Mel's storytelling. And so it was a lot of fun. And some of the stuff that's in the film that were the most exciting kind of discoveries were international talk shows. There's a number of ones there that like I don't think anybody's seen since they originally aired. It's all stuff that's there's tons of Mel stuff on YouTube, but we our great team found all this stuff globally, and you see him in a slightly different gear because it almost seems like it's not the same as when he goes on Johnny Carson and the entire country's watching. If he's on some obscure talk show in the Netherlands, maybe he felt like, nobody's ever going to see this, but you see like different elements of his personality and performance style when you look at these kind of international ones, which was really great and fun and exciting for us.
Yeah, and besides just the funny stuff Mel would say, he had a lot of really deep philosophical things. I think one of my favorites was, I'm paraphrasing, like, comedy is the opposite of death because it's filled with laughter. And another was just, maybe it was his son who said it, that the reason he creates was just that, magical moment of just seeing, something come from nothing, onto the stage. Yeah. And he would do it without the money, though, he is a multimillionaire. But
yeah,
yeah. Still, but I got the sentiment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that the power of an audience laughter is so. I mean, I'm not a comic, so I really don't know. But for Mel, I think that is just the greatest feeling in the world, and it's something that he still gets to enjoy when he does, he does public appearances from time to time, doing Q&As after screenings of his movies, and we've shot at a couple of them, and you see like it's just so energizing, and he's so beloved and still so funny, really, really funny.
Yeah, I think in your film, Carl Reiner said the most he ever laughed was when he was giving that tribute and he took off his nose, like had a fake nose.
Right? Look, it's a clip that ends part 2 of our movie, and it's the funniest thing. And Mel went through so much. It's so elaborate. You know, he had the people staged outside protesting. He wore the entire night this fake nose that he then removes. Really, I get the sense to make Carl laugh, his best friend in the world. It's very heartwarming and hilarious.
Yeah, and just heartwarming is just, you know, the two great loves of his life is Carl and his wife. You know, how would you describe, you know, those relationships? Like, or how did you feel about hearing about those relationships?
I think they were two relationships that were really just magical, and that they, you know, people finding their soulmates. And with Anne, it was a romantic partnership, and with Carl, it was a comedic partnership and a friendship. And you know, Jerry Seinfeld says in the film at one point, like, you know, for many years after both of their wives had passed, Mel would go over to Carl's every night and they would watch TV and eat dinner together. And, you know, Seinfeld says in the film, because he went over to Carl's house for comedians in cars getting coffee and filmed with them doing their nightly ritual. And you know, Jerry said, when you've achieved everything possible in life, this is what you get is TV and TV trays, sandwiches, and your best friend. And it's beautiful. You know, I mean, these are two guys who are absolute titans of comedy and entertainment, and they had each other, and it was just beautiful. But that's the best you can hope for, you know, in this world of madness and materialism, whatever, that's the goal. You know, you really can't do any better than that.
Yeah. And just a couple last questions here. How did your collaboration with Judd start out? Because you also did that great George Carlin documentary.
Yeah. We've made a bunch of films together. I met Judd, I think it was like 2012. I was directing a TV show called Iconoclasts that used to be on the Sundance Channel. And was, you know, you take two well-known people, often from different fields, and put them together. And the episode that I directed with him was him and Lena Dunham, and it was right when Girls had started. And so we got to know each other a little bit on that, and really liked each other. I was a big fan, but we just kind of hit it off, and he really liked what we did with the show, and we stayed in touch and started looking for something to do. And the first thing we started working on was a film that came out in 2017 called May It Last, which is a documentary about the band the Avett Brothers. And so we did a 30 for 30 together about Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden. And we did.
I love that one.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Thanks. That's the one when I talk about that series. I didn't know that was your episode, but whenever I mention that series to someone, that's always one of the episodes I point to.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Jed and I did that one. I did the Bo Jackson one as well, like a couple of years before that. But then, Jed and I have done a bunch of stuff together, and it's a great partnership. I love working with them.
Yeah, how does that partnership work? Just like more like the inside baseball nuts and bolts.
Yeah, it's different every time. A lot of the time, it's kind of based on logistics. You know, like I'm in New York, he's in LA, and so like sometimes we'll divvy up interviews based on that. You know, sometimes we're together on interview days, sometimes we're not. Sometimes I do them solo, sometimes he does. You know. And we just talk a lot, and we talk about the overall philosophy of what we want to do, and it's just a kind of very natural collaboration.
Was there anything in the documentary that you cut out that you wish you could have kept in?
You know, the movie's almost 4 hours long, so there wasn't. I mean. There's so many things, you know. I mean, Mel's almost 100, and there's a lot of stuff that he did that just isn't in the movie at all, because we couldn't get to it, and you know, we also wanted to tell the story in an entertaining way, and so sometimes you have to leave things out and condense things, etc., for narrative momentum. Specifically, and this wasn't one where, you know, sometimes like. You know, in the edit room, you call it like, you know, slaying your babies. And this was when, you know, to cut a scene that you're like, oh God, it's so great, but it's hindering something else. On this one, there really wasn't that. There were some biographical things that were interesting, that like, you know, how he won an Oscar for animated short film in the early 60s. That's interesting, but there just kind of wasn't room for it. Lots of little things like that. But yeah, there wasn't one where it was like, oh, geez, we love this scene so much, but it's got to go because it's killing the rhythm of this or that. That didn't really happen on this film.
Yeah, I mean, and again, did he ever mention this of just, if he were still making movies today with the state of the world which it is, what would do you think he still thinks is right for satire, or is it just everything's just a mess?
Specifically, no, we didn't talk about that, but I do think that from things that he's said, like I no matter what's going on in the world, I mean, this is a guy who was making fun of Hitler. I don't think that there's ever been or ever will be a time that comedy doesn't have a place, and that satire and using comedy as a weapon, as protection, as a reminder that there's goodness and joy in the world. I don't think that there will ever be a time that human beings are here that is not true,
Yeah, well put. And with that, what are you working on next?
I've got a couple of things in development, but nothing I can officially talk about yet, but hopefully have news to report some point soon.
And for those out there, where can people find the documentary?
It's on HBO Max right now, streaming. It's in 2 parts. Watch them in order. And on HBO Max.
Michael, thanks so much, man. I love the documentary and love the stories. Thanks so much for taking time.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot. Nice talking to you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And that wraps up today's episode on Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. And of course, a few quick plugs. Thursday, February 19th, 7 p.m., Young Ethel's That 80s Improv Challenge. Thursday, February 26th, AI versus Human Roast Battle at the Players Theater. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. Also, take some time to like, subscribe, review, comment on Comedy History 101. Give us no less than 5 stars on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, or on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram, comedyhist101. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone! Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.